The rain hammered against the towering glass walls of Stellar Defense Corporation as Lee Sora stood outside, water dripping from her cheap umbrella. She looked up at the massive building that seemed to pierce the clouds themselves, holographic. Advertisements floated around the structure, showing sleek starships blasting through space and quantum engines that could bend reality itself. Sora's hands trembled as she clutched her worn leather portfolio, a gift from her mother years ago, when things were still good. The portfolio was held together with tape and determination. Much like Sora herself, inside were hand-drawn blueprints, calculations scribbled on the backs of old receipts, and theories that had kept her awake for months. She had walked here, from the subway station, unable to afford the hover taxi fare. Her shoes squelched with each step as she entered the pristine lobby. Everything gleamed with polished metal and floating displays showing the company's greatest achievements. Ships that could travel faster than light, weapons that could crack moons in half, and defense systems that protected Earth's colonies. Across the galaxy, the receptionist, a perfectly groomed woman with cybernetic implants that made her eyes glow blue, looked Sora up and down with barely concealed disgust. "You're here for the interview. Are you sure you have the right building?" Sora's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. "Lee Sora, reporting for the junior engineer position." The receptionist's fingers danced across a holographic keyboard. "Take the express elevator to floor 97. Try not to touch anything." The elevator ride felt like ascending to another world, through the transparent walls. Sora watched the city shrink below her. Flying cars zipped between buildings like metal birds, and massive cargo ships descended from orbit, carrying goods from distant planets. This was the world she dreamed of joining, not just watching from the ground, but actually building the technology that made such wonders possible. Floor 97 was a temple to human engineering. The hallway walls displayed cutaway views of starship engines, each one larger than the apartment building where Sora lived. Interactive holograms let visitors explore quantum field generators and gravitational manipulators with simple gestures. Sora paused at one display showing the Mark 7 quantum drive, the same system she'd been analyzing for months with her homemade computer setup. CEO Park Do-hyun's office was larger than most people's homes. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that stretched to the horizon, where massive orbital elevators connected Earth to the space stations above. His desk was a single sheet of programmable matter that could reshape itself at will, currently configured as a sleek workspace surrounded by floating data screens. Do-hyun himself was younger than Sora had expected, maybe 40 years old, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder where his next meal would come from. His suit probably cost more than Sora's family had made in the past year. He didn't look up when she entered. His attention focused on quarterly reports from the Mars shipyards. "Miss Lee," he said without lifting his gaze from the tablet, "I'll be honest with you. Your application is unusual. No engineering degree from Seoul Tech. No experience with corporate research labs. No recommendations from professors or industry contacts." He finally looked up, taking in her simple black dress, the only formal outfit she owned, and her nervous posture. "We're looking for experienced engineers, not—" He trailed off, perhaps realizing how harsh his words sounded. Sora had heard variations of this speech before, at every interview she'd managed to get over the past 6 months. Her lack of formal credentials was a wall she couldn't climb, no matter how brilliant her ideas might be. "Sir, I know I don't have the certificates," Sora said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I've been studying your company's propulsion systems for 2 years. I know them better than I know my own neighborhood." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "There's a critical flaw in your Mark 7 quantum matrix that could cause cascade Failures. Du Hyun's eyebrows shot up so fast they nearly disappeared into his hairline. The Mark 7 was their most advanced system, designed by teams of PhDs and tested by the best minds in human space. No one outside the company should even know its specifications, let alone identify problems with it. Show me, he said, his voice suddenly sharp with interest. He waved his hand, and the office walls transformed into a three-dimensional display of the Mark 7 drive system. The quantum matrix floated in the air between them, its complex geometry pulsing with simulated energy. Flows. So Ross stepped forward, her nervousness evaporating like morning mist as she entered her element. This was where she belonged, not in boardrooms or social situations, but surrounded by the pure logic of engineering problems. Her fingers moved through the holographic display with surprising grace, the resonance frequency. Here, she pointed to a specific component, conflicts with the quantum stabilizers every 47 seconds. Under stress, the harmonic distortion builds up exponentially. She manipulated the display, highlighting the problematic interactions with red energy trails. The entire system would collapse in exactly 4.7 seconds once the cascade begins. Du Hyun stared at the visualization, his face pale. Their computer models had never predicted this interaction. Sora pulled out a hand-drawn schematic from her portfolio. The paper yellowed and creased from months of handling. But if you adjust the matrix alignment by 12 degrees and add a secondary buffer here, she traced the modifications with her finger, you create a harmonic dampener that prevents the cascade entirely. Actually, it would make the system 30% more efficient. Du Hyun studied the diagram with growing amazement. The math was elegant, the solution brilliant in its simplicity. Their best engineers had missed this completely. Yet this young woman had identified and solved the problem using what appeared to be homework. "How did you calculate this?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier dismissiveness. Sora's voice grew stronger as she explained. "I built a quantum simulation using salvaged processors from old phones and tablets. My neighbor works at an electronics recycling center. He lets me take anything that still functions. It took 3 months of 20-hour days, running calculations, while my mother slept. But the math works." She pointed to the schematic's margins, filled with tiny calculations, every coefficient, every variable. I checked them hundreds of times. I couldn't afford to be wrong. Du Hyun realized he was looking at something extraordinary. Not just the technical brilliance, but the determination it represented. While his engineers worked with quantum computers worth millions of dollars, this young woman had achieved the same results with electronic scraps and sheer willpower. "I can fix your ships, Mr. Park," Sora said, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I can make them better, faster, safer. I just need a chance." The rain continued to batter the windows. But inside the office, something had shifted. Du Hyun was no longer seeing a poor girl with no credentials. He was seeing the future of human engineering, brilliant, resourceful, driven by a hunger that no university could teach. Du Hyun couldn't sleep that night. Sora's brilliant solution to the Mark 7 problem kept spinning through his mind. But something else bothered him even more. The worn clothes, the nervous way she'd clutched that taped-together portfolio, and how she'd mentioned working 20-hour days. He'd built his fortune by reading people, and everything about Sora screamed of someone fighting a battle he couldn't see. The next morning, instead of heading to his office, Du Hyun drove his sleek hover car to the address listed on Sora's application. The route took him far from the gleaming corporate districts, past the middle-class suburbs, and into the old part of the city where buildings were made of concrete instead of programmable matter. The apartment complex where Sora LIVED was a relic from the early days of Earth's expansion into space. 40 stories of cramped living units, built when humanity first started sending workers to the asteroid mines and needed cheap housing for their families. The elevator wheezed and groaned as it carried him to the 32nd floor. It's ancient. Motors protesting every foot of the journey. Duhayan spent an hour talking to the building security AI, reviewing footage from the past few months. What he saw made his chest feel tight with shame. There was Sora, day after day, carrying bags of discarded electronics up those same stairs when the elevator broke down, circuit boards. Old processors, broken tablets, anything that might still have a functioning component inside. The timestamp showed her returning home at all hours. Sometimes she'd stumble in at 3 in the morning, exhausted from whatever job she'd been working that day. Other times, she'd leave before dawn, her arms full of repaired devices that she'd return to grateful neighbors. "She fixes everything in the building," said Mrs. Park Yoonji, an elderly woman who lived across the hall. "My grandson's gaming console, Mr. Lee's medical scanner for his diabetes. Even the communal water recycler, when it started making that awful noise, never asks for a payment, just smiles and says she's happy to help." The security footage showed Sora's tiny apartment through the hallway camera whenever she opened her door. Duhayan caught glimpses of a space barely larger than his office bathroom. Cables and electronic components covered every surface, creating a maze of jury-rigged equipment that somehow functioned as a quantum computing lab. But what really made Duhayan's throat close up was seeing Sora care for her mother. Through the slightly open door, he could see her helping an older woman eat, adjusting pillows, reading aloud from scientific journals late into the night. The tenderness in those simple gestures spoke of a love that had endured years of hardship. Duhayan decided he needed to see this for himself. He took the elevator back down and walked to the local electronics recycling center, following the route he'd seen Sora take in the security footage. The owner, a gruff man named Kim Taesung, lit up when Duhayan mentioned Sora's name. "That girl's a miracle worker," Taesung said, wiping grease from his hands. "Brings me broken stuff that even I'd throw away, and somehow makes it work again. Last month, she built a medical monitoring system for her mother using parts from 6 different broken devices. The thing works better than equipment I've seen in hospitals." Taesung led Duhayan to a corner where he kept a special pile of electronics. "I save the best broken stuff for her, not because she pays. She never has money, but because she sees potential where others see garbage. Reminds me of the old days, when humans had to build everything from scratch on the colony ships." With this information, Duhayan made a decision that would have seemed impossible to him just 24 hours earlier. He drove back to Sora's building and knocked on her apartment door. The woman who answered was clearly Sora's mother, though the disease had left her thin and frail. Kim Mi-young moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body no longer obeyed her commands, but her eyes, those were sharp as laser cutters and filled with the same fierce intelligence he'd seen in her daughter. "Mr. Park," Mi-young said, recognizing him from news broadcasts. "Sora isn't here. She's working a double shift at the parts warehouse to pay for my medications." Duhayan stepped into the apartment and felt his breath catch. Every square inch was utilized with the efficiency of a spacecraft. The walls were lined with salvaged screens showing complex calculations. Cables ran along the ceiling like electronic vines, connecting processes that hummed quietly in the background. In one corner, a hospital bed took up precious space, surrounded by modified medical equipment that monitored Mi-young's vital signs. "My daughter sees patterns others miss," Mi-young whispered, settling carefully into a chair that had been modified with additional support systems. "She doesn't think like other engineers. When we had nothing, She made something from scraps. Mi-young gestured to a shelf lined with scientific journals, their pages worn from constant reading. I used to work for the Colonial Physics Institute, designing gravitational systems for deep space stations. When the disease started affecting my motor functions, they decided I was a liability. No job, no insurance, no future. She pointed to a framed photo showing her in a laboratory coat, standing next to a massive piece of equipment. I taught Sora everything I knew about quantum mechanics and gravitational theory. But she taught herself everything else: electronics, programming, systems integration. She learned because she had to, because someone needed to take care of me. Du Hyan sat down heavily in the only other chair in the room. Mrs. Kim, your daughter just revolutionized our propulsion theory in 5 minutes. Our top team of PhDs, with access to quantum computers worth more than this entire building, couldn't solve what she did with salvaged processors. Mi-young smiled, and for a moment her face showed the brilliant scientist she'd once been. Humans adapt. Mr. Park, we survive when others would surrender. The first colonists built cities on airless worlds using nothing but determination and recycled ship parts. Sora learned that spirit from watching me fight this disease every day. She gestured to the modified medical equipment on her bed. Every device you see here, Sora built or improved the neural stimulator that helps control my tremors. She made it from parts of an old gaming console, the medication dispenser. That ensures I get the right doses at the right times. Built from a broken food printer and some sensors she found in a crashed delivery drone. Du Hyan looked round the apartment with no eyes. This wasn't poverty. This was innovation born from necessity. This was what humans did when their backs were against the wall. They didn't surrender. They adapted. I want to hire her, Du Hyan said. Full position, senior engineer level, with benefits that will cover your medical care. Mi-young's eyes filled with tears. She'll say yes, but not for the money. She'll say yes because she wants to build things that matter. Things that help people reach for the stars. Du Hyan was still sitting in that cramped apartment, marveling at what human determination could accomplish. When every emergency siren in the city began to wail, the wall screens flickered and displayed the same terrifying message. Incoming transmission from unknown vessel. All citizens report to emergency stations within hours. Everything Sora had learned about survival would be tested on a scale that would determine humanity's fate among the stars. The first sign something was wrong came from the deep space monitoring stations orbiting Neptune. Automated sensors that had watched the empty void for decades suddenly exploded with activity. Their readings so impossible that the AI systems flagged them as equipment malfunctions. Then the Martian colonies went silent. Admiral Choi Jin-woo was drinking his morning coffee in the orbital command center when Lieutenant Kim Da-yoon burst into his office, her face pale as moonlight. "Sir, you need to see this immediately. Long-range telescopes are picking up massive energy signatures at the edge of the solar system." The main view screen in the command center flickered to life, showing what looked like tears in space itself. Rippling distortion spread across the star field like cracks in black glass, and from those wounds in reality, ships began to emerge. They were nothing like human vessels. Where Earth's ships were sleek and functional, these alien craft looked like living things, organic curves that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Hulls that seemed to breathe and shift as they moved. The smallest was larger than humanity's. Biggest dreadnought, the largest defied comprehension, a city-sized leviathan that blotted out entire constellations as it drifted through space. "Count them," Admiral Choi ordered, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his veins. 237 vessels, sir, and they're still coming through. The alien fleet ranged itself in a perfect sphere around the solar system. each ship taking position with mathematical precision. Then they waited, silent as death, for exactly 1 hour, when the transmission came. It bypassed every encryption system humanity had ever devised, speaking directly through every screen, every speaker, every communication device on Earth and its colonies. The voice was melodious yet alien, like music played on instruments made of crystal and starlight, primitive species of the third planet. The voice began, "We are the Veiled Dominion. Your expansion beyond your birth world has been noted and judged inadequate. You possess neither the wisdom nor strength to join the galactic community." Admiral Choi tried to respond, but the alien signal overrode every attempt at communication. "Your surrender will be total and immediate. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to demonstrate compliance. All military vessels will be destroyed. All space-based installations will be dismantled. Your species will return to your home world and remain there under our supervision." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, the melodious tone had turned cold as the void between stars. "Failure to comply will result in the systematic extermination of all human life. Your cities will burn, your oceans will boil, and your planet will serve as a warning to other species who dare reach beyond their grasp." The signal cut out, leaving Earth in stunned silence. Within minutes, every major city activated its emergency protocols, air raid sirens that hadn't sounded since TH. A third world war wailed across the planet. Citizens flooded into underground shelters while government leaders convened emergency sessions in hardened bunkers. At Stellar Defense Corporation, chaos erupted like a dam bursting. Scientists and engineers ran through the corridors, their voices overlapping in panic. Some demanded immediate evacuation to the outer colonies. Others insisted on launching preemptive strikes, and a few simply sat in stunned silence as the reality of humanity's situation sank in. Du Hyan burst into the main laboratory where his top team was already gathered round holographic displays showing the alien fleet. The ships hung in space like malevolent stars, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in hypnotic rhythms. "Options?" Du Hyan demanded, his CO training keeping his voice level despite the terror clawing at his chest. Dr. Wang Kyung-ho, the company's head scientist, looked up from his calculations with defeat written across his face. "We've run every simulation. Their smallest ships have energy signatures that dwarf our most powerful weapons. Our missiles would be like throwing pebbles at armored tanks." General Han Sang-min, Earth's top military strategist, had been patched in via hologram from the Pentagon's war room. His weathered face showed the strain of a man who'd spent his life preparing for wars he'd never imagined. Initial probe attacks confirmed Dr. Wang's assessment. "We launched everything we had. Nuclear warheads, antimatter torpedoes, even experimental plasma cannons. Nothing penetrated their shields. Our most advanced weapons can't even scratch their hulls. We're defensively helpless." So-Ross stood apart from the group, staring at the tactical displays with an intensity that made the air around her seem to vibrate. Her fingers moved through holographic readouts, calling up data streams that showed the aliens' energy patterns and shield configurations. "Their shields operate on a quantum frequency," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the panicked discussions filling the room. "But there's something familiar about the resonance pattern." She isolated one of the alien ships and magnified its energy signature, the display showing wavelengths that danced across the electromagnetic spectrum like aurora borealis made of pure mathematics. The room fell silent as So-Ra manipulated the data, her homemade quantum simulation techniques allowing her to see patterns that the military's supercomputers had missed. Her eyes widened as she compared the alien shield frequency to something in her own files. "No way," she whispered, then louder. "No way." Du Hyan moved to her side. "What is it?" So-Ra's hands trembled as she called up her Mark 7 analysis from the day before. The quantum resonance pattern that would have destroyed their ships appeared next to the alien. Shield frequency, they were nearly identical, mirror images of each other. Like musical notes in perfect harmonic opposition, their shield frequency, so Ross said, her voice growing stronger as the implications hit her. It's almost identical to the flow I found in our Mark 7 drives. If we could modify our quantum matrices to generate the exact opposite frequency. She turned to face the room, her eyes bright with possibility that seemed impossible in the face of their dire situation. We could create a resonance cascade in their shields, not destroy them, but to stabilize them long enough for our weapons to break through. Dr. Wong scoffed, his face flushed with frustration and fear. That's impossible. The power requirements alone would be astronomical. We need the energy output of a small star to affect ships that large. So Ra shook her head, her mind racing through calculations that had kept her awake for months. Not if we network every FTL drive on Earth, every ship in our fleet, every transport vessel, every deep space mining rig. If we link their quantum matrices together and synchronize their output. She gestured at the holographic display, showing Earth surrounded by thousands of small ships and space stations. We could create a planetary defense grid using the same principle that would have destroyed our ships, turn our greatest weakness into our only hope. The room erupted in discussion as scientists began running preliminary calculations. General Han's hologram flickered as he consulted with his staff. Du Haiyan felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, the flutter of hope in the face of impossible odds. How long would you need? Du Haiyan asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. So Dashro looked at the alien fleet, counted the ships they'd need to modify, calculated the time required to network thousands of quantum drives across the solar system. 60 hours. Maybe less if we can get every shipyard and space dock working simultaneously. Her face suddenly fell as reality crashed back into her consciousness. I need to check on my mother first. She hasn't eaten today, and her medication schedule. Du Haiyan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The young woman who might be humanity's only hope was still worried about feeding her sick mother. I'll send my personal medical team to care for her. Du Haiyan said, right now. Sora, you might be the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. Outside the laboratory windows, the alien ships waited in their perfect formation, patient as predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. The medical emergency alarm pierced through the chaos at Stellar Defense Corporation like a knife. Through steel, Sora's hands froze over her quantum calculations as her personal communicator buzzed with urgent messages from the hospital. Her mother's condition had deteriorated rapidly. The stress of the alien crisis had triggered a severe relapse of her multiple sclerosis. Go, Du Haiyan said firmly, seeing the conflict tearing across Sora's face. I'll have my personal medical team meet you there. Sora sprinted through the corridors. Her mind split between the equations that could save humanity and the woman who had taught her to never surrender. The hover taxi ride to Seoul General Hospital felt like an eternity. The city below them transformed into a hive of desperate activity. Military convoys raced through the streets, while civilians loaded belongings into vehicles, preparing for evacuations that might never come. Mi-Yeon lay in the intensive care unit, her body connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat, every breath. The neural stimulator that Sora had built from gaming console parts sat beside the hospital's advanced equipment, still faithfully regulating her mother's tremors even in this sterile environment. Mom, Sora whispered, taking her mother's frail hand. The older woman's eyes fluttered open, still sharp despite the medical crisis. Don't stop working because of me, Mi-Yeon whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming of life support machines. Save our world. Sora, Show them what humans can do when we refuse to give up. Sora kissed her mother's forehead, tasting salt from tears she didn't remember shedding. I learned from the best teacher in the galaxy. She returned to the laboratory, with a fire burning in her chest that no alien threat could extinguish. The next 48 hours blurred together like a fever dream of calculations, modifications, and desperate coordination across the globe. The scale of the project defied imagination. Every FTL-capable vessel in human space needed quantum drive. Modifications, from massive colony ships to tiny cryopods. Sora's revolutionary frequency modulation system had to be installed on over 3,000 ships scattered across the solar system. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Sora survived on coffee, energy bars, and the kind of determination that had built humanity's first space elevators. Her fingers flew across holographic interfaces, coordinating with engineers in the asteroid belt, technicians on the moon, and factory workers in orbital shipyards. Word of her story spread through the communication networks like wildfire. The brilliant young woman who had built quantum computers from electronic scraps, who was fighting to save the world while her mother lay dying. It captured imaginations across the planet. Factory workers and technicians, inspired by her example, volunteered to work round the clock without pay. "If she can save us all with spare parts," said Lee Byung-hun, a welder at the Mars shipyards, "then we can damn well work a few extra shifts." The modifications required precision that pushed human engineering to its absolute limits. Each quantum drive had to be recalibrated to generate specific frequencies, synchronized down to the nanosecond with thousands of other vessels. A single miscalculation could create cascading failures that would leave Earth defenseless. Dr. Wang worked alongside Sora despite his earlier skepticism, his experienced hands steady as they rewired quantum matrices that had taken years to perfect, in 40 years of engineering. He admitted during one brief break, "I've never seen theoretical physics implemented this quickly." Sora barely looked up from her calculations. "We don't have 40 years, we have 40 hours." The alien fleet remained motionless at the edge of the solar system, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing like slow heartbeats. Long-range sensors detected no communication between the ships. No movement except the gentle drift of orbital mechanics. They waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. With 36 hours remaining, the first test activations began. Small groups of modified ships attempted to link their quantum drives, creating localized fields of synchronized energy. Some tests succeeded brilliantly. Others failed catastrophically, with quantum matrices overloading and ships losing FTL capability entirely. "We're losing to many vessels," General Han reported from the military command center. "At this rate, we'll have barely enough ships left to attempt the full network." Sora stared at the failure reports, her mind racing through possible solutions. The problem wasn't with her calculations. It was with the human factor. Different crews, different training levels, different equipment tolerances. Her elegant theory was crashing against the messy reality of implementation. Then inspiration struck with the force of a lightning bolt. "We're thinking about this wrong," she announced to the exhausted team gathered round her. "Instead of trying to make every ship perform perfectly, we compensate for their imperfections." She pulled up a new interface, showing the network topology as a living web of connections. Dynamic frequency adjustment. Each ship monitors its neighbors and automatically corrects for drift or failure. The network becomes self-healing. The modification required rewriting core software in every quantum drive, a task that should have taken months instead. Sora's code propagated through the fleet like a beneficial virus, each ship's AI learning and adapting her algorithms to its specific hardware configuration. With 18 hours left, the network stabilization reached 90%. With 12 hours remaining, It achieved the 98% efficiency needed for planetary defense. Then the alien ultimatum timer reached its final countdown. Long-range sensors detected movement in the alien fleet for the first time since their arrival. The massive ships began to break formation, ranging themselves into attack positions with terrifying precision. Their bioluminescent patterns shifted from slow pulses to rapid. Angry flashes that painted the void in colors humans had no names for. "They're moving toward Earth," Admiral Choi reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Soros stood in the center of the Stellar Defense Command Center, surrounded by displays showing the status of every ship in her improvised network. 3,000 vessels, from massive battleships to tiny mining pods, all linked together by quantum frequencies that existed only in her imagination until 3 days ago. "It's never been tested at this scale," Dr. Wong warned, his hands hovering over emergency shutdown controls. "If the resonance cascade gets out of control, we could lose every FTL drive in human space." Sora looked at the approaching alien fleet, their ships growing larger on the tactical displays with each passing minute. She thought of her mother in the hospital, fighting a battle against her own failing body with the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had defined humanity's expansion to the stars. "Neither was the first airplane," Sora replied, her fingers dancing across the control interface with the confidence of someone who had learned to build miracles from scraps. "But humans have always jumped before we were ready." The alien fleet accelerated, their massive ships blotting out stars as they approached Earth's orbital defenses. Behind them, the void they left behind looked like holes torn in the fabric of space itself. Sora's improvised defense grid hung to life. 3,000 quantum drives synchronizing their output with mathematical precision. The energy readings spiked beyond anything human technology had ever generated, powered not just by fusion reactors and antimatter cores, but by the collective will of a species that had turned desperation into innovation. "All ships report ready," came confirmations from across the solar system. Network synchronization at 99.7%. Sora's hand hovered over the activation control. A simple red button that would either save humanity or destroy their only hope of reaching her. Stars, the alien ships filled the view screen now, close enough to see the intricate patterns carved into their living hulls, frequency matching in 3, 2, 1. She pressed the button, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance of a young woman's calculations and a mother's dying wish to never give up. The moment Sora pressed the activation button, the entire solar system held its breath. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The alien fleet continued its relentless advance toward Earth, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing with predatory confidence. Then the quantum pulse erupted from Earth like an invisible tsunami, racing through space at the speed of light. The wave was beautiful and terrifying, a cascade of energy that human sensors could barely detect, but alien technology felt like a hammer blow to the face. Sora's frequency calculations proved flawless as the opposing resonance tore through the quantum matrices that powered the alien shields. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The impenetrable barriers that had made the alien ships untouchable flickered like candle flames in a hurricane. Energy patterns that had remained stable for centuries suddenly collapsed into chaotic spirals. The massive vessels, which had seemed invincible just moments before, were suddenly as vulnerable as any human ship. "Shields are down." Admiral Choi's voice crackled through the communication channels, barely containing his amazement. "All alien vessels show complete defensive failure. For the first time since the crisis began, human weapons found their mark. Missiles that would have been swatted aside like insects now punched through alien holes with devastating effect plasma cannons, designed to crack asteroids, carved glowing wounds across ships the size of mountains. Even small Kriya vessels found themselves able to damage the alien Leviathans with their modest laser rays. The aliens' perfect formation dissolved into chaos. Ships that had moved with mathematical precision suddenly scattered like startled birds, their crews clearly unprepared for the possibility of actually being hurt. Some vessels attempted to retreat immediately, their organic hulls rippling as they tried to reactivate their failed defensive systems. Admiral Choi's fleet, though, vastly outgunned and outnumbered, pressed their advantage with the kind of reckless courage that had carried humanity to the stars. Earth's defenders swarmed round the alien giants like angry hornets, their smaller ships dancing between massive tentacle-like appendages that lashed out in desperate counterattacks. The space battle that followed was unlike anything in human history. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the starfield as alien bioships hemorrhaged luminescent fluid that crystallized in the vacuum of space. Human vessels, freed from the terror of invulnerability, fought with a ferocity that surprised even their own commanders, Captain Park Min-chun, commanding the destroyer Soul's Pride, found himself going toe-to-toe with an Ely and Vessel 50 times his ship's size. This is for every human who ever refused to give up. He shouted over the communication channels as his antimatter torpedoes punched deep into the creature's hull. The largest alien ship, the city-sized Leviathan that had emerged first from hyperspace, attempted to retreat toward the edge of the solar system. But without its shields, the massive vessel became a target too tempting for Earth's heavy cruisers to ignore. Coordinated strikes from a dozen human ships carved through its biomechanical armor, exposing glowing organs that pulsed with alien life. Then, as suddenly as the battle had begun, it stopped. A transmission cut through the chaos of combat, broadcast on frequencies that bypassed every human communication system. The melodious voice that had delivered humanity's death sentence now carried a note of something that sounded almost like wonder. Impossible, the alien commander said, the crystalline tones of their language somehow conveying shock despite the vast differences between human and alien psychology. Our simulations predicted easy conquest. Your technology is primitive, your weapons inferior. How did you overcome our defenses? The question hung in space like a challenge. In the Stellar Defense Command Center, every eye turned to Sora, but she seemed frozen by exhaustion and the magnitude of what had just happened. Her improvised defense network had worked beyond her wildest hopes. But the reality of actually defeating an advanced alien civilization left her speechless. Duhayan stepped forward and took the microphone, his CEO instincts guiding him through humanity's most important diplomatic moment. You underestimated humanity, he said, his voice carrying across space to beings who had probably conquered 100 worlds. We don't just build with perfect materials in ideal conditions. We create miracles from scraps, solutions from desperation. He looked directly at Sora, whose face was streaked with tears of relief and exhaustion. This young woman saved our world using salvaged computers and refusing to accept defeat. Duhayan gestured to the displays showing Sora's jerry-rigged equipment, the quantum network she'd built from spare parts and determination. She had no formal training, no advanced laboratories, no resources except her mother's love and her own refusal to surrender. That's what you failed to calculate in your simulations, the power of a species that turns love into innovation and desperation into victory. The alien response came after a long pause, during which their remaining ships continued to retreat toward the edge of the solar system. When the commander spoke again, the musical quality of their voice had changed, carrying harmonics that human ears interpreted as respect. We have conquered 17 systems, the alien said. We have subjugated species with technology that dwarfs your own. But we have never encountered a race that could improvise victory from the materials of defeat. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, it carried an undertone that sounded almost like amusement. Your species is unpredictable. The alien fleet withdrew to the edge of the system, but did not enter hyperspace. Instead, they took up new positions, not the aggressive sphere of conquest, but the protective formation of guardians. Their final message was brief, but carried implications that would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. We will not make the mistake of underestimating your species again. Earth is under our protection now. Any who threaten humanity will face the same fate we nearly suffered. Consider this your graduation into the galactic community. In the command center, Sora finally collapsed into a chair as exhaustion claimed her, the adrenaline that had carried her through 3 days of impossible work drained away, leaving her feeling like a hollow shell. Round her, scientists and engineers cheered and embraced. But she could only think of one thing. Is there any word from the hospital? She asked weakly. Duhayan smiled, his own relief evident as he checked his personal communicator. Your mother is stable. The doctors say the stress of the crisis actually triggered some kind of positive response. Her neural activity is the strongest it's been in months. She's asking to see you. Mi Young had lived to see her daughter become humanity's savior. The woman who had once designed gravitational systems for deep space stations had raised a daughter who could save the entire human race using nothing but love, determination, and electronic scraps. Duhayan placed his hand on Sora's shoulder as she slowly stood up, still and steady from exhaustion. What's next for the woman who saved the world? Sora smiled tiredly, her thoughts already turning from galactic politics to the small, personal details that had always defined her life. She looked toward the hospital where her mother was recovering, probably surrounded by the same jury-rigged medical equipment that had kept her alive through humanity's darkest hour. I think it's time to fix my mom's wheelchair, she said with a soft laugh. The left motor's been making a weird noise for weeks. Even after saving humanity from extinction and earning the respect of an advanced alien civilization, Sora remained focused on the small, human acts of love that had always been her source of strength. She had turned her mother's courage in the face of disease into a planet's salvation, proving that sometimes the greatest innovations come not from laboratories or universities, but from the simple refusal to give up on the people we love. The universe had learned a valuable lesson that day. Never underestimate a species that turns love into miracles and miracles into survival. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology or military might, but through the same stubborn determination that had once built cities from nothing and turned broken electronics into quantum computers. And somewhere, in a hospital room in Seoul, a mother and daughter held hands while starships from distant worlds stood guard over their small, precious planet, the ND.